address Citizen Weston read to us might have been compressed into a nutshell. All his reasoning amounted to this: if the working class forces the capitalist class to pay 5 shillings instead of 4 shillings in the shape of money wages, the capitalist will return in the shape of commodities 4 shillings worth instead of 5 shillings. The working class would have to pay 5 shillings for what before the rise of wages they bought with 4 shillings. But why is this the case? Why does the capitalist only return 4 shillings worth for 5 shillings? Because the amount of wages is fixed. But why is it fixed at 4 shillings worth of commodities? Why not at 3, or 2, or any other sum? If the limit of the amount of wages is settled by an economical law, independent alike of the will of the capitalist and the will of the working man, the first thing Citizen Weston had to do was to state that the law and prove it. He ought then, moreover, to have proved that the amount of wages actually paid and at every given moment always corresponds exactly to the necessary amount of wages and never deviates from it. If, on the other hand, the given amount of wages is founded on the mere will of the capitalist or the limits of his avarice, it is an arbitrary limit. There is nothing necessary in it. It may be changed by the will of the capitalist and may therefore be changed against his will. Citizen Weston illustrated his theory by telling you that a bowl contains a certain quantity of soup to be eaten by a certain number of persons. An increase in the broadness of spoons would produce no increase in the amount of soup. You must allow me to find this illustration rather spoony. It reminded me somewhat of the simile employed by Mencius Agrippa. When the Roman plebeians struck against the patricians, the patrician Agrippa told them that the patrician belly fed the plebeian members of the body politic. Agrippa failed to show that you feed the members of one man by filling the belly of another. Citizen Weston, on his part, has forgotten that the bowl from which the workmen eat is filled with the whole produce of national labor, and that what prevents them from fetching more out of it is neither the narrowness of the bowl nor the scantiness of its contents, but only the smallness of their spoons. By what contrivance is the capitalist enabled to return 4 shillings worth for 5 shillings? By raising the price of the commodity he sells. Now, does a rise, and more generally a change in the prices of commodities, do the prices of commodities themselves depend on the mere will of the capitalist? Or, on the contrary, certain circumstances wanted to give effect to that will? If not, the ups and downs, the incessant fluctuation of market prices becomes an insoluble riddle. As we suppose that no change whatever has taken place either in the productive powers of labor or the amount of capital and labor employed or the value of money, wherein the values of products are estimated, but only a change in the rate of wages, how could that rise of wages affect the prices of commodities? Only by affecting the actual proportion between the demand for and the supply of these commodities. It is perfectly true that, considered as a whole, the working class spends and must spend its income upon necessaries. A general rise in the rate of wages would therefore produce a rise in the demand for, and consequently, the market prices of necessaries. The capitalists who produce these necessaries would be compensated for the risen wages by the rising market prices of their commodities. other capitalists who do not produce necessaries. And you must not fancy them a small body if you consider that 2/3 of the national produce are consumed by 1/5 of the population. A member of the House of Commons stated recently to be but 1/7 of the population. You will understand what an immense proportion of the national produce must be produced in the shape of luxuries, or be exchanged for luxuries, and what an immense amount of the necessaries themselves must be wasted upon flunkies, horses, cats, and so forth. A waste we know from experience to become always much limited with the rising prices of necessaries. Well, what would be the position of those capitalists who do not produce necessaries? For the fall in the rate of profit consequent upon the general rise of wages, they could not compensate themselves by a rise in the price of their commodities, because the demand for those commodities would not have increased. Their income would have decreased, and from this decreased income, they would have to pay more for the same amount of higher priced necessaries. But this would not be all. As their income had diminished, they would have less to spend upon luxuries, and therefore their mutual demand for their respective commodities would diminish. Consequent upon this diminished demand, the prices of their commodities would fall. In these branches of industry, therefore, the rate of profit would fall, not only in simple proportion to the general raise of wages, but the compound ratio of the general rise of wages, the rises in the prices of necessaries, and the fall in the prices of luxuries. What would be the consequence of this difference in the rates of profit for capitals employed in different branches of industries? Why, the consequence that generally obtains from whatever reason, the average rate of profit comes to differ in different spheres of production. Capital and labor would be transferred from the less remunerative to the more remunerative branches, and this process of transfer would go on until the supply in the one department of industry would have risen proportionately to the increased demand, and would have sunk in the other departments according to the decreased demand. This change affected the general rate of profit would again be equalized in different branches, as the whole derangement originally arose from a mere change in the proportion of the demand for and the supply of different commodities. The cause ceasing, the effect would cease, and prices would return to their former level and equilibrium. Instead of being limited to some branches of industry, the fall in the rate of profit consequent upon a rise of wages would have become general. According to our supposition, there would have taken place no change in the productive powers of labor, nor the aggregate amount of production, but that given amount of production would have changed its form